This special presentation explores harm reduction, media narratives, and the early history of DanceSafe through the work of its founder, Emanuel Sferios.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I enjoy giving this talk, especially because it's like exactly what I've spent my career doing. You know, the title is Psychedelics and Harm Reduction and their relevance, excuse me. But I thought we'd break down the meaning because it's like those two terms themselves are really packed, right? Like, what is a psychedelic, right? Is MDMA a psychedelic? You know, generally, mind revealing. I've had someone ask me once, what was the most therapeutic drug you've ever taken? And I replied, in all honesty, well, that would have to be methamphetamine, because my addiction experience in my 20s taught me more about myself than any other drug I've taken. I would say prednisone the same way taught me, like, oh my God, we think we're in control of ourselves. We think we know who we are and that we're responsible for our behaviors. And, on some level we have to say we are, but like, you can take drugs and like it can completely change you and there's nothing that you can do about it. So that was a really interesting experience. So what is a psychedelic, right? And, I'm going to be talking about MDMA in the history of harm reduction. So, is it a psychedelic? Yeah, in a broad definition. And then what is harm reduction? This is even more interesting to me because harm reduction is a term that was chosen specifically to appeal to the least common denominator. Even the most anti-drug person, can get behind harm reduction, the phrase, because who could be against reducing harm? I mean, notwithstanding that what's happening now in the new administration where they're attacking harm reduction, I'll get to that later. But it was, a term chosen politically, which I've never liked. I was reluctant to use it when I founded DanceSafe, which was in 1998, because I think the term implies that drug use is always or primarily harmful. And that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case with any drug, not just psychedelics, but any drug. Like the vast majority of people who use meth, crack, heroin, fentanyl, the vast majority do not develop substance use disorders. They use drugs infrequently and will report more benefits than harms. So drugs are primarily beneficial. People, if you don't find a benefit, you don't really use it again, right? Of course, many people do get in trouble with drugs, and some drugs, when you get in trouble with them, it can be really bad. But I didn't want to use the term harm reduction, but I did because back in the 90s, it was a very hostile environment, for any drug, really. When I started DanceSafe, like literally within a year, the DEA launched an anti-ecstasy media campaign where they were like totally demonizing this drug. It was really, we'll talk a little bit about that, but it was a more risky environment than we have today.
It's the new illegal drug of choice, luring young people in the pursuit of happiness. Tonight, a special 48 hours MTV investigation. Ecstasy.
There's feelings of euphoria, total happiness with the world.
It's helped me become more secure in who I am.
It really increases your tolerance for other people.
It helps me learn more and more about what makes me tick.
This little pill is fueling a whole new subculture. Ecstasy works by flooding the brain with serotonin, a chemical which regulates mood and memory. It also heightens perception of color and light.
They have the glow sticks surrounding him, and what they'll do is take turns at this.
But that rush of serotonin can be dangerous, causing the body to dehydrate and overheat. Users have to drink a lot of water.
And so I chose to use it. But I remember when I first talked to Rick, Rick Doblin, as I was organizing my first phone call with him, just to say, here's what we're doing. I'm just looking for support. He said to me, well, you know, we're more of a benefit enhancement organization than we are harm reduction. And I thought about it for, 15 seconds or whatever. And then I said, what's the difference? And that really has been the thrust of my personal career and how I organized the Rave community in the beginning and to the media and everything, that the best way to reduce the harms of using any drug really is to focus on the benefits. Even with people with substance use disorders, they're learning now, right, in harm reduction therapy, that when you help people learn why they're using a drug, and when they can believe that it can be helping them, that there are benefits, they will often modify their behaviors. But when we teach children that drugs have no benefits, they're always going to hurt you, why would any sane person do that? And you're taught that, and then you take a drug and it feels good, and but you think in the back of your mind, like, I know I'm doing something bad, and that leads to the very irresponsible drug taking behaviors that the drug war claims that it's trying to prevent. So we emphasized the benefits first, always, and benefit enhancement and harm reduction are two sides of the same coin. And I think that it's often even better to talk about what those benefits are, because then that leads people to, use more responsibly. We were trying to create a responsible rave culture, drug culture that was centered around the electronic music community at the time. So that's my position, my understanding of harm reduction. It really is mixed together with responsible use. And we talk about psychedelics. So this is so what is the talk about, right? It's, we might these days believe that harm reduction is largely about substance use disorders, and there are many, certainly the vast majority of state and county funded programs and even other nonprofits that call themselves harm reduction do deal largely with people who are getting into trouble with opioids and meth and whatnot. But that's very, very new. The professionalization of harm reduction and its emphasis on addiction or substance use disorder. It didn't begin that way. It began, we'll talk about the history, right? Harm reduction began with needle exchange in the 80s. And these were IV drug users and their supporters and advocates who wanted to stem the spread of HIV. And that's really important to understand. Like, harm reduction began with people who use drugs trying to help themselves and their careers. And then when I started organizing DanceSafe in 1998, it was the same thing. We were MDMA users who were trying to help our peers and ourselves avoid the counterfeit pills that had started killing people. That was mainly paramethoxyamphetamine, or PMA. And I like to emphasize this, and I will throughout this talk, that harm reduction began as a movement. Both needle exchange, people went to jail. When I started DanceSafe in '98, there were still needle exchange activists who were in jail because they lost their court cases when they used the necessity defense, which I hired a needle exchange lawyer to represent us when I started DanceSafe, because I thought we were going to get arrested too. And then we would use the same defense that, yeah, maybe we're breaking the law by touching a drug, but we're preventing a greater harm. And that argument did win a lot of cases for needle exchange slowly. The defense is similar to, you can jaywalk if you're saving the life of a child who's about to get hit by a car. Like if some cop gave you a ticket for jaywalking, you went into court and you would use the necessity defense. It was necessary that I did this because I was preventing a greater harm. So that was the argument that eventually city after city got needle exchanges legalized, but it wasn't until Clinton in the 2000s when it became federally legal. It was still federally illegal, and I thought we were going to get arrested, and we never did. Like when we had our first big meeting in a coffee shop in Berkeley, I told people, all right, we expect to be arrested, but don't worry. We have lawyers and we have money, and we're going to put up a defense. And this is what I really thought was going to happen. So there's like 40 people that showed up at this meeting. Next meeting, there was only like 7 people that showed up, but those were the best volunteers ever. And DanceSafe, like, in the Bay Area, really, really great. We didn't even have the name DanceSafe back in at that time. We were calling ourselves the Ecstasy Harm Reduction Project. But it's really important. God, I do this. It's really important to know, like that. I didn't start a nonprofit and have a legal structure. Like, my training was in activism, right? I was working with Food Not Bombs. Who knows Food Not Bomb? And in Berkeley, there were groups like Cop Watch. We took cameras out and videotaped the police right before cell phones to have records of any harassment that was going on. Homeless rights group, prison activism. I was doing all this, and none of us made any money. And we made decisions by consensus. Like, this is how I learned my activism. When I started DanceSafe, and we started getting young people from other cities that wanted to do it, we went out and did them trainings. Like, I trained them in consensus decision making, and we grew really quickly. I'll talk to you about the media campaign that the DEA launched, because it's a big part of why we grew so quickly. But it was a movement, right? When we trained a group, we trained them to train others, train the trainers, so that they didn't have to come back to us, to the Bay Area group, to get trainings. Like, we gave everything away. And I used that style of organizing even from the very beginning. And I love to say this, maybe I had the courage and the knowledge. I discovered marquee reagent that could be used to identify counterfeit ecstasy tablets, and had the courage to go out and do it, and provided inspiration. But everything that DanceSafe became was because of the young people at that time in the rave culture. I'd never been to a rave when I started DanceSafe. In fact, I approached the Berkeley Free Clinic and the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic to ask if we could set up testing centers there, because my inspiration was the Dutch government. That's where I learned about it. They had a couple of offices in Amsterdam where people could bring their ecstasy tablets, and they would test it with this reagent. And this is part of the drugs information and monitoring system. It was justified by gathering data. It was only secondarily important that it might be helping save lives, right? Like, well, we're gathering data to know what's in the drug supply, right? And I was like, what, there's a reagent that can detect MDMA and weed out the counterfeit pills? Like, I want to do this. And I took MDMA as a teenager for therapy. And when I first did it in 1986, 1 year after it had been made illegal, and it was really good for me. So I was outraged that Prohibition had created this adulterated market. But, you know, I first wanted to model what the Dutch were doing, but it was, you know, too edgy for both Berkeley Free Clinic and Haight-Ashbury. So that's when I decided to say, well, I'm going to go to Raves and set this up. And I just fell in love with the rave culture at the time. There's nothing like it. These people really, really cared about each other. It was really grassroots, right? These parties were being thrown by regular people. They charged just enough money to cover, you know, the expenses. You know, what we have today with festivals is completely different. It's very centralized, but much more like a curated spectacle, right? Burning Man and regional burns are a little bit different. They sort of, and that's a good way to think about the early raves in the 90s. They were much more like Burning Man, where everyone participated. And the other thing about it is festivals these days, usually they span 2 or 3 days, and everyone's doing different drugs at a different time. You don't necessarily know what the other people around you are doing, but these raves in the 90s, everyone was doing MDMA. 90% of the people were doing MDMA. They were from, you know, dusk till dawn, and like 9, 10 p.m., everyone took MDMA. And like some of these, we called them massives at the time, like maybe 5, 10,000 people. These were the largest, very large. Like, to be with, you know, 5 to 10,000 people and 90% of them, and you're all on MDMA at the same time, produces this camaraderie that just doesn't exist anymore. Like, not until we legalize or decriminalize will we, you know, and people literally throw, we're having an ecstasy event, everyone come and we're all gonna, like, that would be the only way I think that we could replicate that again. And like I said to myself, like, when I have kids, I want them to be a part of this culture. Like, people cared about each other. I grew up in Florida in a punk culture in Tampa where it was alcohol driven, and I almost got beat up or killed by skinheads a couple times. I had to talk myself out of, like, you know, there were skinhead murders in Tampa, right? It was very, very different. And DanceSafe really grew because of that. So I want to give credit to the volunteers. I just, you know, was an organizer, and, you know, carried the torch for a little while. So how did DanceSafe get so popular? There was 2 reasons. One is the DEA campaign. The first one is that I started the first and only, because nothing like this exists anymore, public laboratory drug testing program, which you might know under the name drugsdata.org, run by Earth and Fire with Arrowhead. Well, that was a DanceSafe program at first. And people could send an ecstasy tablet into the lab, and then we would post the results with a picture of the pill on the website. And the reason that I got away with this is it kind of exploited a loophole in a DEA policy. Who's been to drugs data? Who's used it? It's not around anymore. It just got shut down about 1.5 years ago. But there's tens of thousands of drugs on there. It started with ecstasy tablets, right? So the DEA had a policy dating back to the 60s where you could, if you have a DEA license, you're a private lab with a DEA license, you could do anonymous qualitative drug testing, where the idea is, like, a parent finds some pill or powder in their child's bedroom, wants to find out what it is. You can send it to the lab, but it has to be anonymous, and you can't do quantitative testing. The DEA wanted to give parents the opportunity to learn this, and so the way it would work is, like, labs would advertise, if they wanted to do this, they were allowed to. They could advertise, send in, you know, with a money order for $100, and then you would call in a couple of weeks later an outgoing answering machine, and you'd put a code number on the piece of paper with the powder or pill or whatever, and then they would read off the results. So you'd call up, and then you'd wait for your code number, and then you would find out what it was. and then you could send your son or daughter to Straight Incorporated and have them traumatized for life. But I called this lab in Sacramento and said, hey, what if instead of giving the results to over a answering machine, you gave me the results and I posted them on a website. And instead of somebody writing a code number on the pill, you take a picture of the pill and send it to me. So I will post a picture of the pill and you tell me the city it came from and what it's being called, and then and we'll pay you $100. And he thought about it. He said, sure, I don't think that violates the law. And so we started that program, and it took off really, really slowly. I sent the first 6 pills in, bought them locally from one dealer, 6 different ecstasy tablets, like a blue dolphin and a pink Teletubby or whatever, right? You know, and all 6 were pure MDMA. And I was like, I'm trying to show people that, you know, because this dealer probably stuff, right? But slowly people started sending pills in, and it became really, really popular. And a lot, like we were able to expose that there's a lot more than MDMA that's being sold as ecstasy.
When the sun sets and the music starts, the DanceSafe volunteers go to work, testing ecstasy for adulterants like PMA.
Anybody here?
Anyone can bring them a pill.
What was it called?
That one's Butterfly.
Butterfly?
First, they scrape it with a razor to obtain a sample. Add a few drops of chemical solution.
Sulfuric acid and formaldehyde?
And if there's any ecstasy in the sample, it turns purple.
That's a positive reaction.
Oh, wow.
Other drugs turn different colors. Most, including PMA, don't change color at all. But whatever the result, and this is the controversial part, DanceSafe returns the pill to the user.
You know, there are people who would say the really responsible thing to do is to take that pill away from them regardless of what's in it.
Right.
Not at all. Okay, they come to the table, they go, can you test this? And you go, nope. And you take it and you put it in your pocket or you throw it away. They then pull another 20 out of their pocket, go buy another pill and take it. Doesn't help a thing.
We're not trying to make drug use safer. We are making drug use safer.
And so that really made us popular, because once word got around the internet, which happened really, really fast, like we were getting hundreds of thousands of hits. Like everyone was coming to the DanceSafe website to find out what was in the various pills being sold in their city, so that when they went out to party that weekend, like especially on the weekends, it crashed our server. This was like 1998, right? The early days of the internet. And so we also started posting the results of our marquee tests on the website. So in the Bay Area, these pills were DXM, these pills were meth, these pills were MDMA, these were MDA, right? And so we started getting phone calls from other young people in other cities who wanted to do what we were doing. That's when we started the training program, and we did this with no money yet at the time, and it started growing. So that was reason number one. Those days were great. Like you really felt like you were a part of. We're fighting the drug war. We're protecting ourselves and our friends, and we're cleaned up the fucking market. Like that was the best thing about this. Like when we were at these massives in Oakland, you know, we had 2 testing stations with lines, like 100 people each. Like you couldn't see the end of the lines, and our voices would get hoarse saying, this is a positive test for the presence of MDMA-like compound. We couldn't distinguish back then between MDA or MDMA because Marquis alone can't do that. And we didn't have Simon's reagent yet. But our voices would get hoarse repeating these results. And when a fake pill was discovered, immediately the person would go and track down the dealer. And maybe the dealer didn't realize that. And like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I stopped selling them. But many times security would get involved and like kick them out of the rave. Like I had one time, this young woman comes up, gets her pill tested, and this like larger guy comes behind the booth and whispers into my ear, "I'll give you $20 if you tell her it's real." This actually happened. And I was like, "What did you say? You want me to lie to this woman and tell her her pill is real?" And like, they like grabbed that guy and like dragged him out of the rave. It was really, really quality control, like direct quality control. And we cleaned up the market. When I started doing lab studies on fentanyl test strips back in 2016, I was the first person to assess their efficacy for harm reduction. I did so because I had the same idea. Back then, fentanyl was contaminating heroin. And when I discovered there was a strip that could detect it, I was like, wow, we could do this again and clean up the heroin market and save a shit ton of lives. It didn't end up working out that way because none of us realized at the time that heroin was about to go away. And within a year, it was gone, and everything is heroin. Everything is fentanyl right now. It's really hard to find heroin. So fentanyl test strips aren't really helping people who are using illicit opioids. Maybe we'll get to that if we have time, but mostly this is about how psychedelic or MDMA users became, they were instrumental in what's become what harm reduction is, right? Like it's actually now called drug checking. So it grew with the addition of more reagents that could identify more drugs. Now we have 10, 11, but Folin is only useful for piperazines. And when's the last time anyone has seen a piperazine, right? It's been a long time since that class of drugs were around. So I'd like to say there's really 10 reagents now but you can identify LSD and cocaine, like, you know, the reagents are very, very useful. But they only tell you what the dominant drug is in your powder, pill, or liquid, or whatever. Like they're not going to tell you potency, and they're not going to tell you if it's adulterated with anything else. But at least with MDMA back in the 90s, if we didn't really see, and this is pretty much has been the case. It's rare to find ecstasy tablets or someone who's selling MDMA that is MDMA plus something else. It has happened, but usually it's when someone doesn't have the precursors to make MDMA, then they'll sell something else as MDMA because you can make a lot of money doing that. And man, young people, like people back at these raves, when I started going to them in the late 90s, like they would fork out $20 3 or 4 times to find the pill that actually contained MDMA. You know, it's a very, very compelling experience. I'm jumping around a bit. Feel free to butt in anytime and ask a question. But I wanted to...
Quick question.
Yeah.
So when you first started, was this before or after the controversy with the holes in your brain? And
no, I'm going to tell that story. That is coming right up now, the whole media thing. Okay, this is an incredible story. I want to write my autobiography one day and tell this because it's just the world is so crazy. All right, so the DEA, ever since Gary Webb exposed the CIA and DEA collaboration in the crack epidemic, their clout was like non-existent anymore. They before that, they used to have the respect of Congress people, and then after the Iran-Contra and after it came out that they were responsible for flooding Black communities with crack, they were not very well respected. And so they got their demon drug now with fentanyl, right? They now, like, organizing parents, you know, calling it poisoning, getting drug-induced homicide laws again, like drug wars back again. DEA's got a lot of clout again. But they tried doing this with MDMA. So where do I start? one day in early 1999, I get a phone call from 60 Minutes and Dateline on the same day, wanting to do stories on DanceSafe. And 60 Minutes called first, and I was like, really? Like, I was really skeptical. She was like, oh, yeah, we found you on the internet. We think what you're doing is great. We'd love to do a story on you. And I was like, well, I have to think about this. And then like an hour later, I get a call from Dateline. I'm like, wait a minute, 60 Minutes just called me. And they were like, no, you can't, don't do 60 Minutes. You have to do us. I was like, well, why can't I do both? And no, you can't, but and why are you doing this? Oh, the same kind of thing. Oh yeah, we just found you. We think what you're doing is great. No fucking way did I believe any of that. So I called Rick. Rick, you're not going to believe what happened. I got phone 60 Minutes 20 Dateline. He's like, oh, you don't know. The DEA just launched this media campaign. They sent out press releases to all the major news media, TV shows, newspapers, magazines, everything. New demon drug. They had these bogus George Ricuarte studies claiming brain damage. And this drug is going to create a generation of brain damaged youth. And I was like, oh fuck, like I don't want to do that. I don't want a hit piece against us to participate in that. But Rick, very wise Rick, said to me, you should do it. He said, any coverage for harm reduction is going to be good coverage, even if they do a hit piece against you. So I asked my friends who's the least sensationalistic, and they said, oh, do 60 Minutes, don't do Dateline. So I did 60. And when they came out to interview me, the talking head came out. Her name is Vicky Mabry, and they were powdering my face. The producer, Wendy, what's her last name? I can't remember. She saw that I was really nervous, and she comes and whispers in my ear. She's like, don't be nervous. I've done Ecstasy, and I think what you're doing is great. So I relaxed a bit, and I also was prepared for what was about to happen, which they were going to ask me these gotcha questions. So basically, Vicky Mabry just said to me in like 15 different ways, like, aren't you just promoting drug use? Or what do you say to parents who accuse you of promoting drug use? And I knew enough about PR to never repeat your opponent's argument, even to deny it. So I never said, no, we're not promoting drug use, because if I did, that's all they would put. And the narrative would be, this group, is they're promoting drug use or not, right? So I just said, the drug war is killing people. Prohibition has created a counterfeit. I just stayed on message. We're saving. Where are those parents that, we're working with parents whose children died from PMA. We're going to do press conferences with them soon, right? This and that. So we weren't too hopeful, but a month later, when the segment came out and that 60 Minutes broke the story, they were them and Dateline were competing to be the first major TV news magazine to break the new demon drug story, and you can get credit for it, whatever. And we're lucky that 60 Minutes came out first, because what happened is it was a 12-minute demon drug story, had the DEA, brain damage, all that same kind of stuff, but 3 minutes in the middle was about DanceSafe. And they really did us justice. Like, we look like what we were, young people trying to protect ourselves from counterfeit ecstasy tablets. And after that, my phone never stopped ringing. I did like 500-600 interviews over the next 18 months. I was on Geraldo and CNN 2020, the Jim Lehrer Hour, the Christina Show, which is largest, bigger than Oprah. And we rained on their parade, because every single one of these shows was supportive of DanceSafe, and the message became not MDMA is killing people, but fake MDMA is killing people. And the solution that was presented was not, we need to crack down on these raves. The solution was, we need to have pill testing. And oh man, it pissed them off. Really bad. I was on dozens of these like morning shows, like, you know, Bob and Doug radio show in the morning, and they would have me and a DEA representative on there, and they invariably sided with me. And like, so before I get to Oprah and the holes in your brain, the two mistakes that the DEA made were, number one, the internet had been out for 4 years by then. And if there's one topic that the internet fixed back then, it was the information on drugs. Prior to that, how did you find real, truthful information on drugs? The drug narrative was totally controlled by, you know, 4 or 5 corporate networks, and the DEA was very used to winning the propaganda war by controlling the information that was out on these networks. And that didn't work anymore, because now it was easy to find real information about drugs. Like, everyone's finally talking about it, you know? So that was the first mistake. The second mistake is that MDMA was not a new drug. MDMA had been around since the late 70s and like really widespread since the 80s. So all of these producers, reporters had done it and they loved it. They didn't want to do a demon drug story. So when 60 Minutes like showed us, it gave them an angle to be able to do a story on MDMA that was righteous in a way that they wanted to. And we were all set to go on Oprah. It was going to be me. It was going to be Rick Doblin. I think Charlie Grove might have been on the tube. Sue Stevens, definitely. Sue was working with Rick. She took it with her late husband who had cancer for therapeutically. Oprah was going to do the real MDMA story. We were all excited to go on Oprah. And we had all these successes, you know, before Oprah, like 100 of them. I remember I was in Cosmo, Playboy, Time, Newsweek. It was a crazy time period. Like, I got to thank the DEA, because DanceSafe would not have grown. The DEA made DanceSafe like popular. And we raised $500,000 from like the first generation of NASDAQ millionaires, these young ravers in the Bay Area who just suddenly had all this money. But 2 weeks before we're set to go on Oprah, the producer calls us all and says, I've been pulled from the show. They're taking it a different direction. So, well, we're like, okay, you know, that's not a good sign. That's pretty ominous. So then the show comes out, and what they had done, they found a teenager, this woman, can't remember her name now, but I talked to her, and her mother and a radiologist and Oprah. And they were in the radiologist's office, and they had a screen where they were showing this young girl an MRI of her brain. And an MRI measures blood flow. And blood flow changes in different areas of your brain depending on what you're doing. Like, you're thinking about a math problem or imagining, you know, it's just blood flow is always different in different places. But what they did is they turned the contrast up on the MRI so that the places with low blood flow disappeared, and it appeared that there were golf ball size holes in this young woman's brain. So here's the radiologist saying to this young woman, like, do you see those holes in your brain? And the brain is rotating, and it is like Swiss cheese times 10, right? Like holes everywhere. Those holes are from your ecstasy use. And I'm like, oh my God. And like Oprah is just like taking this whole thing seriously. It was so over the top absurd. And, you know, what you can imagine the DEA would pick to do, because they thought they had control over the narrative. They were, you know, activist colleague once told me a line that applies here. She said, those who play in rigged games get stupid. And it's exactly what, like, nobody really believed the holes in your brain. Maybe some young people did or whatever, but it was so absurd and it was kind of funny. But also, I was pissed. Like, this young woman is being lied to, and I wanted to find her just to tell her that this isn't true. And so I tracked her down and I called her and I said, "Hi, I'm Emanuel, DanceSafe, et cetera. And, I just wanted to tell you, like, you don't actually have holes in your brain. Like that, MRI was not accurate." And she said, "Oh, I know, but I'm having so much fun being on television." And I did not know how to respond to that. I was like, "Oh, okay." Uh, so the little anecdote to this story is that like 15 years later, I'm producing a documentary on MDMA, which I haven't finished yet, but it has kind of kickstarted again. MDMA, the movie, it might actually come out in a few years. I thought, well, let me call her again and see, now she's in her 30s, and see what she thinks about, this. So would that be interesting, right? But I decided against it because I looked her up online and she'd actually made a career out of being an anti-drug, and victim of MDMA. She wrote a book called Rolling Away, My Agony with Ecstasy. And did that work? I don't know if it worked. I think it totally backfired. Maybe some people believe the rumors, but I think most people realize nowadays that MDMA isn't putting holes in your brain. And even all the neurotoxicity studies that have been done, which it is true, MDMA is neurotoxic, but there's been no studies that have shown any cognitive impairments as a result of using MDMA. The ones that claim memory impairments, it's not true. What they did is they took heavy, currently active polydrug MDMA users. They only were required to abstain for 2 weeks, and then they compare them with graduate students from the university where the study is being done. And of course, statistically, the party kids scored lower, but all their scores were perfectly within the normal range. Just they were less than the graduate students, obviously, right? And then they use that to claim. And listen, MDMA is the most studied drug in the world. There have been more studies on MDMA than any other drug, pharmaceutical drug, any drug, you name it, by far. And the reason is not just because the DEA was trying to demonize it, but like scientists, neuroscientists are fascinated by a drug that can produce empathy and feelings of love, right?
For once in my entire life, I feel like I am the popular kid. I come to a rave and everybody seems to like want to know me. All it does is make you bond with people and become friends. How could that be bad?
It's one big love party is what it is. It's like year 2000 hippies, the way I look at it.
The trippy expressions and the devotion to expanding your mind. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference between 70s acid heads and millennium rollers.
It just lends you into a certain state of mind that's really pleasant.
It's the best feeling.
Everyone was looking for this. Like, it has been studied so much. There are no negative consequences to using MDMA, even overdose. The neurotoxicity, which we know takes place, does not produce cognitive impairments. I like to say if anyone has brain damage from taking MDMA, I do, because I don't know anyone that's taken it as much as I have. I remember when I interviewed Ann Shulgin, and Ann always advocated, 4 times a year, right? But then she said to me in the interview, well, but I took MDMA every week for 10 years. And eventually it stopped working, right? And I was like, every weekend for 10 years? And she's like, yeah, it was my writing drug. And so I followed in her footsteps, and for many, many years took MDMA every weekend without any negative repercussions for me, except the one really awful consequence of the neurotoxicity. And that is, can't feel MDMA anymore, or very, very mild compared. Yeah, some people that happens after, a dozen times. Some people like me can, get over 500 times. And, I guess I was kind of lucky. All right, I got way off on a tangent. What was I talking about? This is the media campaign. And oh yeah, the girl with the holes in your brain.
Yeah.
So that sort of catapults DanceSafe. And then when I resigned in 2021 and went on to do other things, I gave the laboratory program over to the Airwoods, and they called it Ecstasy Data for a while, and then realized, especially after the fentanyl crisis started, that people can send in anything, and they changed it to drugs data. And drugsdata.org. It's still up, but the owner of the lab, Jeff Zender, sold it, and the new owner decided not to do the program anymore. I haven't actually talked to Earth and Fire about the details of it, but my suspicion is that the DEA either pressured the new owner or actually, was in cahoots with the new owner before they bought it. Because when you have a business where 90% of your income comes from one program, $100 per test, thousands and thousands, 100 tests a week. Think about it. Like when you buy a business where one program is 90% of your income, like why would you shut it down, right? Like what happened to drug detection laboratories in Sacramento? You can Google them; they're still around. But they they got rid of the program. So I suspect. So now we don't have a public program where people can. There's UNC, right, that does drug checking, but you have to apply to be able to submit drugs. You have to be a program to submit them, and then only programs are allowed to see them. There's no more public place where people can go to find out what's in the drug supply. It lasted 26 years, and then it got shut down. I think it was the DEA, personally, even though I can't prove it. One other story about the early days in DanceSafe. Before the media campaign, for about 6 months, high-dose dextromethorphan pills started appearing on the market everywhere across the country. DXM, it's what's in Robitussin cough syrup. The amount that were in these ecstasy tablets were the equivalent of like drinking 2 bottles of Robitussin, which will put you on the ground, won't kill you, but you will be babbling like semi-conscious on the ground. And these pills caused thousands of medical transports from raves to hospitals in late 98 and early 1999. Because when somebody falls semi-conscious, you'll have to call an ambulance. The best thing, the most immediate thing we did when we started the pill test is we got rid of those DXM pills because they were everywhere. And I believe, and I will provide you some evidence right now, that the DEA released those pills into the rave culture in order to create medical emergencies, in order to justify the anti-ecstasy campaign they were about to launch. And it wasn't just a media campaign. That media campaign was part and parcel of them appealing to Congress to get millions of dollars to open what they called demand reduction centers around the country to crack down on ecstasy and raves. And so here's why I think that it was the DEA. When we started the lab program and people started sending ecstasy tablets in, we could see the route that they took across the country. We knew that Los Angeles and Florida were big importers because the new pills, right, whatever it was, like Punisher pill, that was actually later. That was when the candy presses, like all the new pills they had. But you know, whatever it was, like a pink Dove or a Mitsubishi, right? Like we could see people would start sending it in from Miami, and then you could watch, like, you know, a week later, we get some pills from Georgia, and then we get, you know, like you could actually see the route where these pills would move and how the transportation was across the country. But there was one pill, dominant high dose DXM pill that was a triangle, and it was green, like a thick triangle. This is like a candy press, right? It wasn't a circular pill. The green triangles with high dose DXM appeared all across the country instantly, which is very, very odd. We knew they weren't being imported, that whoever was making them in the United States and had a capability. They had a network across the whole country, because like if you were just producing, even if you could produce 1 million pills, like you live in one city, right? You're like a chemist, or you're not a chemist. You have a candy press and you buy a bunch of DXM and you're like, I'm going to become a millionaire, right? Like, well, okay, well, how the hell did you get a network to get these things released in every city all at the same time? Like, who has the ability to do that, right? And then, just coincidentally, it happened just before the DEA's anti-ecstasy campaign, right? And then when I'm on all these Bob and Doug radio shows, like the DEA representative always had this one line every single time. They claimed, we have never tested a confiscated ecstasy tablet that was not just pure MDMA. And I would be like, that's ridiculous. Go to the DanceSafe website and look at our lab testing program. This is one of your licensed laboratories. Are you saying they're lying? You can see ecstasy tablets there that have all sorts of drugs in, and they were just silent, right? This is one of the reasons that they were instructed to say that, and they couldn't break the line, and that's one reason why we won the debate. So they were in total denial that there was any fake pills out there. So then, when the 48 Hours show comes on, which DanceSafe was in, they also had a DEA agent giving a tour to the reporter, and they're talking about just this explosion in MDMA and ecstasy and how dangerous it is, and they brought him over to show the reporter like tens of thousands of ecstasy tablets that they confiscated, and he pours it out onto this table, and what are they? The green triangles. So, none of this is proof, right? But I can tell you, and I think the DEA is responsible for fentanyl, and I think they're responsible for the 15 different drugs that are mixed. On average, there's 7 to 15. Like fentanyl powder and pills are not, they have so many adulterants in them, it's crazy. And who the fuck would do that? If you're trying to make money, you know, why not just put out pure fentanyl, like fentanyl with filler, right? Because pure fentanyl is too strong, right? But, you know, make a 2% fentanyl powder pill that only has fentanyl in it. Why do we have xylazine, medetomidine, benzos, and all these other, you know, drugs mixed in with them? Well, the DEA has always measured its success using 2 metrics. This is both in their internal memos and their public reports. They kind of stopped this more recently, but if you go back to the 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s, they measure their success by whether or not drugs are expensive or cheap, and whether or not drugs are pure or adulterated. When drugs are expensive, they think they're winning. When drugs are cheap, they think they're losing. When drugs are adulterated, they think they're winning. When drugs are pure, they think they're losing. Because they are largely ideological. They're not trying to save lives, they're trying to save souls. Once you cross the line and commit the sin of using a drug, well, you're going to hell anyway. What does it matter? They want to stop the kids from using drugs, right? Just like the DARE program, like this is their logic. It's not logic, it's at all. It comes from, you know, scared straight, right? So when the drug markets are more polluted, then they can more easily justify their own involvement in the drug trade. That's another thing. The DEA didn't crack down on ecstasy. They took over the ecstasy trade by allying with one dealer in each city and getting kickbacks in order to then bust everyone else. This is what they do, but that's another topic. So where do we go from here? I can talk about a lot. How much time do we have? We have a lot of time, right? So that's...
Oh, yeah. I've got a question.
Yeah.
So I worked with MAPS on the phase 3 clinical trials, and I'm sure you at least heard of some of the public comments that were made at the FDA roundtable when they voted 9-2 to turn it down. And one of the most notable ones that caused, you know, a hilarious stir internally, but also just in general, was one of the panelists for that board saying people are going to get treatment from MDMA assisted therapy and go home and binge drink and do cocaine with their gay lovers. And you can go on YouTube and look up that panel. It was a public statement made by a board member in the public adjudication of whether or not it should be approved as a medicine. And so would you say that, you know, in now our good year of 2026, public opinion is still kind of wary about MDMA use particularly? Do you think it's kind of transitioning? Do you think that people really distinguish between MDMA and ecstasy now? Like, what are your thoughts now that we've had these, you know, the FDA trials and still comments out there?
I think that FDA member was very likely, you know, anti-drugs to begin with and didn't require any other coaxing to vote no. But I think the FDA voted no because of the Symposia campaign. I think 100% that's why they voted no. And to be honest, I don't think they voted no because they really thought that the results could have been skewed, that the enthusiasm of the researchers influenced the answers that the patients gave on the CAPS test. All the arguments that I think Symposia gave, I personally don't believe that they really believed it. What I think was going on is that the FDA was very, very liberal and were very, very concerned about what would happen in the new Trump administration. And Symposia very successfully politicized MDMA therapy as if it was a right-wing, part of a right-wing takeover. And I think that that subtly influenced the liberal FDA members. I can't prove that, but it's hard for me to believe, otherwise.
Fair assessment. I haven't heard of it politicized. I know that, you know, with Cover Story that came out and all of the media leading up to it, I'll tell you, wild working for a company that's suddenly in the news every day. So when you're talking about 60 Minutes and Dateline calling you on one day, I was like, oh, I remember the feeling of like, don't respond to any press, send it to this one person. But I think that your comment about Symposia is kind of scary because that's also a grassroots organization that was kind of founded in harm reduction, and they really tried to protect people from practitioners that were malicious. No?
You know, I'm liberal, and I have some, you know, mild to moderate concerns about, you know, the ultra far right championing psychedelic therapy, but I don't think it's such a terrible thing. And I know the Symposia people, and I like most of them. I think they're good people. I know one of them I didn't like very much, but he's no longer with them. But I just think it's part and parcel of the polarization that's happened in our country after Trump got elected. I think it's really sad. You know, Rick was a mentor of mine. Rick said something to me that early in my activism around drugs that was really helpful and that made my work more successful. He said, treat your potential adversaries, treat your perceived adversaries as if they're potential allies. And Rick always did that. And, you know, supposedly people weren't around, you know, back when in the 80s, they were younger. And when it was impossible to imagine MDMA legalization without getting conservatives on board. So Rick made an intentional strategic decision to reach out to the right and chose veterans as the dominant PTSD patient, which, you know, he got criticized for because there's, you know, far more women survivors of rape and incest and abuse, and, you know, like with PTSD as a result of that. Like, why not focus on that, right? But at the time, like, it made sense, and I was a part of these conversations, and I agreed with it. Like, yeah, let's focus on veterans because then we can win over the right wing. And you know, who doesn't want to help veterans? Like, whether you're left or right, you know, veterans were sent to fight wars based on lies, and part of their PTSD is the fact they were lied to. And like, who wouldn't want to support them? Well, you know, even the left supports healing of veterans, right? So I thought, right? And then, like, I think that we became so polarized, and I think that's the fault of everyone. I think that's the fault of the left as well as the right. But I think Symposia is a product of that polarization, and they didn't like the fact that there were, you know, right-wing benefactors funding MDMA therapy, and were very critical of Rick for working with them. But I know Rick. I've known Rick for a long time. Like, Rick, like, Rick talks to everyone and anyone. Like, we've been at Burning Man where he's talking to a billionaire fundraiser, and along comes some kid, and, you know, oh, Rick Doblin, hi, and Rick will turn and give them just as much time as anybody else. Like, I really respect Rick a lot, and I think what happened is really, really tragic. Despite the fact that I'm really scared of Trump and Peter Thiel and what's going on with authoritarianism in this country. Like, that's true as well. So thank you for asking that question. I wanted to say that. I hope I've been balanced in my assessment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's always heartening as someone that worked on those trials to hear, like, you know, it wasn't our scientific inquiry and it wasn't, you know, the data that we put out there, but it was, you know, the strings beyond our control outside of that.
I'll say something else about this. You know, PTSD is assessed through interviews, through these CAP scores, right? You know this, you participated, which is a self-assessment. And so one of the criticisms is that, you know, oh, the researchers were all very enthusiastic. You know, they may have said to these patients, oh, you're on this cutting edge study for treatment. Like, so maybe there was some kind of subtle influencing of the expectations of the patients going into the study, which made them give better assessments afterwards. I wouldn't say under direct pressure to do that, but what I would say is that what's the difference? Because PTSD really is a huge part of it is about your self-identity and how you identify with your PTSD. And so if MDMA can help, along with the belief that it can help, change your sense of identity around your trauma, then that's successful. I also think that maybe perhaps MDMA doesn't help very much with PTSD. I also believe that. Like, maybe it really doesn't. And Rick chose this really extreme psychological trauma disease, right, syndrome, and I know it's true because it's so pervasive and there's no good treatment for it. And it would be like, if MDMA showed success in that, maybe it would really help towards legalization. But maybe MDMA is really, really good for helping people with more mild and moderate relational trauma, and people with severe PTSD, maybe it's not so good, right? I don't know, like, because, but what I think, do I have regrets having spent so much time personally working on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD for veterans, only to see the FDA vote no? I don't know if I have regrets, but maybe I think we should have used the cannabis model. If for the past 30 years we had been arguing for medical MDMA, take-home medical MDMA to prescribe to people to use among friends and family, not psychedelic assisted, we might be farther ahead right now, like cannabis won, right? But none of us could have thought back in the 80s and 90s that anyone would ever have been willing to legalize take-home MDMA. But I have always, even back when I started DanceSafe, advocated that this drug in particular is really therapeutic for relational issues, not even trauma, just, helping people and promoting community and making friends, and when done in community settings. So DanceSafe, we always argued for that. But, the politics, I joined with Rick. And I mean, you can watch one of my videos on YouTube where I followed two veterans from the Iraq War who took MDMA for their PTSD. It's called Dead Dog on the Left. I was the first, and as far as I know, only person who's filmed a veteran with severe PTSD before, during, and after their MDMA therapy. And so it's a story of friendship and healing between these two friends who served together in Iraq. Dead Dog on the Left might seem like a strange name, but when you watch the movie, it's only 30 minutes, you'll understand where that name comes from. Anyway, any other things you want to talk about?
Should we open up? Do you have?
Yeah. If folks want to, oh yeah, it looks like Christine Zimmer.
Yep.
Go for it, Mooncat. Welcome in.
Hey, yeah, this has been really fascinating. Thanks for all this great information. I had a couple things. You were talking about the Ricuarte studies, and I remember learning about the blood flow imaging and all that. But wasn't there also a study where they accidentally gave them meth instead of MDMA?
That's the main Ricuarte study,
Yeah.
which may or may not have been accidental, because meth in gigantic doses can damage dopamine cells and cause a type of Parkinson's. And Ricuarte claimed that he gave MDMA to these rats and they got Parkinson's. And then it was an aide assistant to him that came forth and said, oops, we accidentally gave them meth instead. That is a really difficult, that's a mistake almost as mysterious and like, which you just don't know how it could possibly have happened. Similar to Albert Hoffman accidentally getting LSD into his system. Another mystery. So, which has led people to speculate that, maybe Ricuarte knew what he was doing. He certainly, Rick tells me, he was the only researcher who refused to take MDMA. Like, he never took MDMA. Like, all the other people researching MDMA, all the neuroscientists who got NIDA funding back then, they, like I said earlier, they did these studies on MDMA because they took it and they realized, oh my God, we want to find out how this drug works and what's going on here. And back then you had to get NIDA funding, you had to design your study as if you're looking for harms. So, but really they wanted to find out other things, as drug work, so they sometimes didn't even publish the, what they were really looking for in the study. That's like loosened up a bit, thanks to MAP's work that now NIDA even funds some studies that are looking for, the therapeutic benefits of MDMA. But it's really bizarre to me because like NIDA is the National Institute on Drug Abuse, right? But the problem is like once a drug is declared arbitrarily by the DEA to be Schedule 1, then NIH no longer has any ability that you can't get grant money from NIH to study a Schedule 1 drug. You have to get it from NIDA, and NIDA's mission is not about, bringing a drug to market as a medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely seemed like there's an agenda. My second question is more like recent with the executive order. You said they've been, cutting harm reduction, they've been cutting research, and now all of a sudden we're throwing Ibogaine into the mix and kind of fast tracking it, which seems like from a harm reduction standpoint that has a lot more risks involved with it, with health, and just a lot less that we know about it compared to other things like MDMA and psilocybin. So maybe you were already going to talk about that, but that was the other topic that I hope that you'd touch on. And thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty recent. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at the executive order, talking to people about what they think is going to come of it. I know Maps's newsletter, Rick's statement about it is hopeful, but like it's not a slam dunk. Wasn't it only like $50 million too? Like that's not a lot of money. And Rick loves Ibogaine. Maybe it came from Rick. Like the focus on particular drugs probably has to do with the people who have the ear of Trump and Kennedy, and I have I think that's I think this emphasis on psychedelics as addiction treatment is kind of similar to the emphasis on psychedelics and PTSD treatment, which is that like if you've never done a psychedelic before and you're stuck in a certain way of thinking about yourself, like a psychedelic, particularly a strong psychedelic, can radically change your perspective. And there's a chance in there that you can have some realization about your self-identity that solves your problem. But I think that's just a chance, and it might be a small chance, Like Ibogaine has the added benefit of reducing or eliminating for quite a while withdrawal symptoms from opioids. So that's helpful, right? Because you can have this crazy 48-hour cycle experiences where you see your dead family members and all these crazy things that happen, which again might help you if you're using opioids to cope with past trauma. Maybe it could be helpful. But like, I think that there are broader reasons for addiction that need to be emphasized, and then the notion that any psychedelic is kind of a cure-all for it, just like for PTSD. Like, I'm a little more skeptical of that, but this is the way that everyone's still choosing to fight the prohibition, right? The medical model, and appealing to people who have really severe problems like addiction and PTSD. That I tend to think psychedelics are really, really helpful for people who don't have severe mental problems, and maybe even partially helpful for people with severe mental, right? Like, so what, like we should focus on like normal people or average people, or we should be focusing on MDMA and how it helps people with autism, because I was diagnosed when I was 50 with type 1 Asperger's type autism, and I was like, wow, it's just like everyone diagnosed late in life. Like, it really explained my life. Right. I love public speaking because I talk like a professor all the time. When I talk like this with one person or a group, like I come across as being a know-it-all, right? Like, but I used to think growing up that MDMA really helped me because I had trauma. And then all of a sudden, when I got diagnosed with autism, and of course I know about, Alicia Danforth's studies with Charlie Grove in LA, and how there's a lot of people on the spectrum who report that MDMA helps them. I realized that, that's what really, that's why. And maybe because I started taking MDMA as an adolescent when I was 15, 16, which is where the oxytocin social bonding window is open. Like that's one of the reasons people on the spectrum have a difficult time with social relationships. They don't have that same oxytocin response. And Alicia Danforth and Charlie kind of proved that in both animal studies and with human studies that at any time later in life, you can reopen oxytocin sensitivity. And then a person, this is what people on the spectrum report, like they understand their own emotions, the emotions of others, they can make friends, they can bond, become social. And like, I remember, I feel like I was lucky because I had no friends growing up until I dropped out of high school. And then most of my friends were like, because I was an activist and I was doing projects and I was always organizing people. Like I published a punk rock fanzine and we distributed 10,000 copies and I had distributors. And so all my conversations with people were, about how, it was all about like getting stuff done. I was this leader, right? And then I took LSD too, LSD and MDMA. And like all of a sudden, like, I just had these shoot the shit kind of conversations that I saw my friends having with each other that I was like so confusing to me. And I never understood why are they doing it. Like, and I feel lucky that I did a lot of MDMA as an adolescent during that crucial time. So I think that really softened some of the Asperger's characteristics that I had, which is maybe why I went through most of my adult life without getting diagnosed, because the MDMA really, really helped me. And so I tell this to everyone, people will say, well, shouldn't we, keep this drug out of the hands of teenagers? And I'm like, no, the younger you are, the more helpful psychedelics are going to be for you. Like I make no bones about it, like I think I did LSD first. I think I was 15 and then 16 when I did MDMA. And they were only beneficial for me. So mushrooms as well.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm pulling up Joe.
Hi, yeah. So kind of you answered a lot of it in some of your previous answers, but my first question is just kind of what are your thoughts about the medicalization of these drugs more broadly?
Yeah, there are some thoughts I haven't stated about it, which is that I, like many, find it, what's the word, a bit distasteful that my social media feeds seem to be filled with professional wannabe psychedelic therapists and as someone who's always advocated for the community use of these substances, I guess I respect integration circles more than I respect a professional therapist, right? Like, I even think the model of therapy that we have in our country is maybe not the best way of healing, right? Like, someone who goes to a stranger to talk about their problems is someone that doesn't have anyone in their community that they can talk about with their problems, right? But because I'm on the spectrum and I did have trauma and I did take MDMA when I was 16 to heal that trauma with a friend and started talking about it, and then got all my friends to take MDMA and let's all talk about our trauma and just have intimate conversations like all the time, because I was the guy that got MDMA for all of my friends and I never opposed it to them as party drug, right? It was like, oh, it's great, we sit around and talk, and that I got very used to having interpersonal, deep conversations, and very, very, very healing for me. And I tend to believe that people who are more open and can talk about things with their friends and family, like maybe you can't with your family, especially if they were your abusers, right? Obviously, right? But the more you are able to do that, I think that's a better form, whether you're doing whether you do it on MDMA or a psychedelic or not. I think it's a better form of healing when that can happen than the modern professional form of therapy, which, you know, we all have to admit, it's about a career, it's about making money, and well-intentioned people, but right, the notion that the best way to heal is to come to me and take a psychedelic while I sit with you and we talk. You know, and then what happens with advertising when it does become legal, and sort of, we got a little taste of it, you know, the 2023 MAPS was amazing, right? Right. Holy cow. But like, I've been going to MAPS conferences forever. And this was the first time that it was not an activist conference. Was not a community it was an industry conference, right? Some of you might have been there. Like, it was crazy, the vendors out there, ketamine therapy and mushroom products and all of that. You know, it's a double-edged sword. And am I old school? Yeah, this ties in a lot. It's a topic I like to talk about, which I think is the misrepresentation of shamanism, right? And not just shamanism, but the use of psychedelics in indigenous cultures historically, because it is just not true in any culture that a shaman administered mushrooms or ayahuasca to a patient and sat with them to, you know, help them heal. Like, Maria Sabina gave mushrooms to the tourists that came down there, and she got her hut got burnt down, and she was kicked out of her village because of that. Right? They didn't like that. Few people don't know that. But shamans typically took the psychedelics themselves to diagnose the patient. They communed with the spirits, but Western therapists who want to add psychedelics to their practice promote this false notion that they are just continuing a tradition that has been around for thousands of years. And that's not the case. That's not what happened at all. And then the other side that's really neglected is that indigenous cultures, like in the Americas, they, other than the shaman, they trip together as a community. They just like we do. There's no reason to think people 1,000 years ago are any different than us. You take the mushrooms and you have a good time and you have intimate conversation and you have fun and you laugh. That communal use was around before any shamans usurped these medicines for themselves. So yeah, I think communal use, the way parties, raves, settings with your friends and family are the best way to take psychedelics, even when you're talking about healing. And it's a little distasteful to see the professionalization and the money that's involved in it, and, you know, wondering then if, like, they're going, the people who do start making money, if when these things become legalized for medical use, then suddenly want to see the recreational use, or what they call recreation, stopped because they want people to come to them. Like, I kind of witnessed this in Grass Valley, California, around cannabis where I lived, where the cannabis growers voted no on recreational legalization because they realized that I'm going to be out of money. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, the only reason you're making $4,000 per plant is because there are people languishing in jail, right? Like the prohibition, it only increases the price of cannabis when people are being arrested and put in jail. So you have to support this, right? So I wonder, you know, like, we're not at a place right now where, you know, psychedelic therapists are actively opposing decriminalization or whatever, but you think about these things. And then I was so excited, like probably all of you, a couple of years ago with the FDA decision, and then it's like all of a sudden they voted no, and like, I just think, like, should we have done it differently? In hindsight's 2020 though, right? Like, but can we start now? We can start now a movement, you know, for, you know, even just decriminalization. Just stop arresting people, would be helpful. But like legal regulation for recreational use or take home for medical use, like they might have a better chance of succeeding, or at least they'll have more far-reaching effects than psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with a professional. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk.
That was great. I couldn't agree more. My second and final question is, are you familiar with the entactogen research chemicals such as 5-MAPB or 6-APB? If so, what are your thoughts on them, and what are your thoughts on the research chemical gray market in general?
I love 5-MAPB. I love it more than MDMA now. Interestingly, I think I feel it a bit stronger because I have such a tolerance for MDMA that I took 5-MAPB and it felt stronger than MDMA did to me. But I know they have a similar mechanism, serotonin releaser. They use the serotonin reuptake transporter, which is where the neurotoxicity happens. So it's a bit strange to me that I do feel it so much, but it lasts, twice as long as MDMA. It's not quite as mushy, but you do get the full entactogenic effect. I actually did a podcast. My podcast, I haven't made an episode in 5 years, but it is still up. It's called Drug Positive. And I did an episode where I interviewed Matthew Baggett, who has a startup in Tactogen, where they're creating new entactogenic drugs. And in that episode, we talk about 5-MAPB and some of the other entactogens that they're creating. I think the title of that is New Fun Drugs Coming Soon. That could have been another episode with someone else. I think that's the one with Matthew Baggett, but if you go to Drug Positive, you can find it. I'm all in. I think I love drugs. I'm a druggie. I like to reclaim that word. Why do foodies get to call themselves foodies and have a positive association where druggie has a negative association, right? Let's reclaim that. You don't have to worry about giving someone an addiction by being positive about drugs. That's not going to happen. Being positive about drugs and talking about your benefits that you've had is not going to cause someone to develop a problem with drugs. It's just not. It's actually going to reduce the phenomenon of addiction and problematic drug use because, like, again, I said this at the very beginning, the drug war and anti-drug sentiment and culture creates the abusive drug-taking behaviors that it pretends to be fixing. What else can I say about it? Yeah, I think it's great. More people making new, like, allow themselves to be guinea pigs experimenting with new drugs. We wouldn't have 2CB if Sasha wasn't courageous enough to dose himself with it, right? And I love 2CB. That's my favorite drug. So yeah, praise to all these people developing new research chemicals.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution to the space. Super appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. I'm just looking to check and see if we have any other questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any, so the floor is open. If anyone has any questions for Emanuel, you're free to raise a hand, pop it in the chat. I'll read it out. In the interim, Chelsea, who is in the chat here, and she's also a member of Rave Safe here in St. Louis, did drop a link to a program run by St. Louis County called the Project Eagle Fang Drug Checking Program. And it's very similar to what you're talking about, Emanuel. You can send in an anonymous sample. They post the results online. I'll drop the link here in the chat, but it's truly something to be beheld.
What technology do they use to test the drugs with?
That's a good question. Looks like it's funded. So they're doing it through the St. Louis Department of Public Health and the Physician Group Toxicology Laboratory, but they don't list what kind of drug testing kits.
Okay, great. Yeah, because then, GCMS really is the gold standard. FTIR won't pick up substances often that are less than 5%. So great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
talk.
And
I
thanks
could
for
talk a
listening.
bit about the purity test kits, or I could talk about fentanyl test strips, its history and the future, because I've been working with an immunoassay test strip manufacturer to create the first quantitative fentanyl test strips, which takes a long, it's a long process, but basically a strip that can tell you the potency of your fentanyl, which I think has the greatest potential to save lives and reduce overdoses, second to any product other than naloxone, because people are dying because they don't know how much fentanyl they're taking, because batches and pills and powders can vary like dramatically. Like you could have 1% fentanyl, you could have 30% fentanyl, and like so and that's a similar topic, quantitative testing, like consumer quantitative testing. I believe in consumer products, not just because I develop and manufacture and sell them, but because I think it's more empowering when you put the tool in the hands of the person, right? I'm, of course, all in favor of drug checking programs, but they will only ever be a drop in the bucket compared to the power of a consumer product that can, where millions can be sold directly into the hands of consumers and they can test their drugs themselves. And so,
yeah, I mean, whatever direction you want to take us in, Emmanuel, I know that we have test kits now at Psychedelic SPL, courtesy of yourself, truly. Thank you so much. And so whichever direction you want to take us, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah. Well, I could talk a bit about the purity test kits. It's very interesting. No one's ever threatened to sue me before, but Miraculix, the German company that I was promoting, threatened to sue me after Matt Aragon and myself developed similar products, and we fought back. We hired Brad Burge, former MAPS communication director, who started a PR company, and we launched a campaign that exposed their very poorly written patent application, which I believe was fraudulent. I believe that they told me they knew they would never get a patent, so they put fake formulas in their application. In other words, they admitted to me directly that they were violating patent law. I think it's section 14, which says, like, if you want a patent, if you want 20 years protection on an invention, it's called the patent bargain. You have to reveal what your invention consists of and how it was made, so that anyone skilled in the art can replicate it. In other words, you got to come clean. And if it truly is a novel invention, we'll give you 20 years protection. But you can't submit a fake patent application in order to intimidate potential competitors. That is called, I forget the name of it. I always forget this phrase. Like, it's not like fraud. They call it like mistreating the patent office or disrespecting the patent, something like a violation of section 14 of the Patent Act, right? So, Matt and I spent 6 months and thousands of tests to figure out the formulas that worked to get a quantitative result for LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin. And then to be threatened, sued by, this company who's like, first of all, overcharging for them. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud that we won that. I mean, they didn't sue us, they backed off. And so we're still selling them. But it works on the principle of the Beer-Lambert law, right? That the amount of a saturation of a color in a liquid is proportional to the amount of a substance that is diluted into that liquid, right? So you find a reagent that reacts with a specific color to a drug, and you put a very specific amount of the drug in there, and look at the color change, right? But the trick is that you have to figure out the strength of the reagent. So the marquee reagent is sulfuric acid and formaldehyde, and you can, some people like use 10% formaldehyde, right? Some formulas. Then we're just talking about the spot tests, right? Because when you do a spot test, you see a purple to black result, there's MDMA in there, right? But, if you have a bunch of marquee reagent and you put a little bit of MDMA in there and it starts to turn purple, you have the strength. If the reagent is too strong, it's going to go, even with the tiniest amount of MDMA, it's just going to turn dark purple immediately, right? And if the reagent is too weak, then it's not going to change purple at all. But there's a narrow spectrum in there called the Beer-Lambert, based on the Beer-Lambert law, that if you get the strength of the reagent right, then you put a specific amount in there, you can display that full spectrum. So that's the color bars that are inside the box with the MDMA kit that range from violet to dark purple. With the LSD kit, for example, that range is so small that we had to choose what microgram range we want them to be able to detect. And we chose a lower range, like really the best, the easiest to identify visually is around, between 25 and 75 micrograms. And that's all we were able to get. Miraculous kits claim that you can detect between 0 and like 200 something micrograms. And I just don't believe that's true. I'm not saying they're lying, but the Hoffman reagent does not have a Beer-Lambert spectrum that is that wide. And so and there's a lot of Reddit posts where people are like, you can't distinguish between the color, the upper range of their chart. It's like there's dark blue and ever so slightly bluer and bluer and bluer. Like it's not possible, really. So we call that a semi-quantitative kit, which is okay because you don't need to know the exact, like for safety reasons, you just want to make sure that you're not getting like 500 micrograms, like you got liquid, right? You can get it to where okay, this is about 50, this blotter is about 100, right? So it's really successful that way. The quantitative strips that we're working on, there's a lot of technical stuff about that. That'll probably bore you if I get into my brain can be really, really technical. But
even just knowing the difference between, some of the other folks on the market that claim to be able to do such large ranges, when it really just becomes non-useful information at that point. So, even though the layman terms explanation of the color spectrums is useful.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I have sort of saw myself as a de facto regulator of drug checking tools ever since I started DanceSafe, because there was another company that cropped up. They're still around. They called themselves Easy Test in the Netherlands, EZ Test, that were selling marquee reagent. And they were putting out a color chart that showed MDMA, MDA, and MDE with a color bar that had slightly different shades of purple to black, claiming that you could tell the difference between these MD compounds with marquee reagent. And it was just absolutely false. You can't. And marquee reagent will not distinguish between MDA, MDMA, and MDE. And so I called them out on it, right? Like they were overselling the ability of their product in order to make more money. And this same phenomenon goes on even today. Even within the fentanyl test strips, it's just crazy. And I worked my way up in both the CDC and the FDA to find out whether they had the ability to regulate fentanyl test strips, because there were companies, there still are companies putting out strips that don't work. And they told me, sorry, we don't. Like, we don't have the ability to do that. The FDA regulates urine test strips. Maybe not as well as they should, but urine, when you're using these immunoassay strips to test urine, it's a very, very different phenomenon, because drugs in urine is only ever concentrated at like micrograms per milliliter, but drugs in the front of you like are concentrated at, like, when you dilute them in water, at like milligrams per milliliter. And so you have to do tons of laboratory studies to determine whether or not any of the drugs you're testing or any cuts inside those drugs are going to produce false positives. They're going to cross-react. And so I did those studies, right? Like, this is, maybe if we have more time, I can tell you how fentanyl test strips came to market, right? Because I was the person that did that. Well, so to be honest, like, the first organization to use fentanyl test strips was a safe consumption site in Vancouver, Canada called Insight. And they just did some informal study. They bought some fentanyl strips and they tested the drugs that people brought in to consume. And then they published a report saying that fentanyl, this was in 2016, saying that fentanyl was in 85 or 83% of the drugs that people brought in. And that was very suspicious. Like, that was early on, and like, wow, that's crazy. And I didn't see the direct study. I found out about the study in the summer of 2016 when I read an article that the College of Pharmacy of Manitoba was not allowing the pharmacists to distribute fentanyl test strips for drug checking purposes, because they said these strips have never been assessed for this purpose. They are urine test strips. And so I read that. And the first thing I mentioned earlier is like, holy shit, there's a strip that can potentially detect fentanyl in heroin. Oh my God, like, we could clean up the heroin market. Like, but they're right. The College of Pharmacists was right. You don't know whether or not the Insight study was accurate because no one's ever tested them. So I bought 5 brands of fentanyl test strips. And in collaboration with Kara Lynch, Dr. Lynch from UCSF, Zuckerberg Toxicology Laboratory, introduced to me by a friend of mine. She's very harm reduction. We tested all of these strips, and I designed and led the study. We tested cocaine and levamisole and benzos and like everything we get our hands on to find out at what concentration do all these strips produce false positives, because how else can you guarantee that they work? How else can you give people a set of instructions that can guarantee that it's going to work? False negatives weren't a problem, thank goodness, because the strips are so sensitive to fentanyl. False negative wasn't the problem. The problem was false positives. And sure enough, like, it gave a lot of false positives, you know. So, I chose a strip by this Canadian company called BT&X. Maybe people are familiar with them. And DanceSafe started selling, but I spent a year doing those studies and coming up with a set of instructions, because I didn't want blood on my hands, and I wanted these things to really work to clean up the heroin market. After a year, I allowed DanceSafe to release them and made BT&X millions of dollars, because then everyone started using them. But then, this is a whole nother thing. This is crazy. So then, like, in 2021, a batch came out that was producing false positives in mass, and we had to do a recall and like hundreds of thousands of strips. It was this major shit show. And BT&X was kind of tight-lipped about it, but they refunded our money and gave us new strips. And And right around the same time, we learned that BTNX had been lying to the entire harm reduction community. They were telling everyone, they had been for 5 years, telling everyone that they were the manufacturer, and they were not. The strips were manufactured by a Chinese company called AssureTech. And to the best of our knowledge, what we think happened, well, what we know happened is that those strips had a different antibody in it completely. Those strips had a completely different sensitivity profile to all of these potential false positives. What we suspect, because we couldn't get anyone to admit anything, is that during COVID, this Chinese company called AssureTech was overrun with producing COVID strips, and so they farmed out the fentanyl test strips to some other company who just used a completely different antibody, which you can't do that because every antibody has different sensitivity and selectivity. Selectivity just means how sensitive is it to other drugs. So it's a type, we want it to be really sensitive to fentanyl, but not to other drugs. But there's always a point where you can concentrate another drug to produce a false positive. So we had this recall while we learned that BTNX wasn't actually making the strips. And at the same time, I get contacted by WHPM, this other company based in the United States. And they're just like, hey, we have fentanyl test strips. Would you like to use them? And I'm like, it's not that simple. You have to do this whole slew of lab studies on them. But go ahead and send me some samples. And I tested them with some MDMA that I had at home, which meth and MDMA are the two drugs that are really sensitive to false positives. And I was like, whoa, these are not giving false positives. So then I contacted Kara again. But this time, we decided to make a strip specifically for drug checking, which had never been done before. All the strips on the market, including the BTNX strip, were repurposed urine test strips. So we produced 4 different prototype strips that we tested and then chose the one that performed the best. And they did not give false positives at pretty high concentration. So they were a superior strip. And we released them with big fanfare, no known false positives. We dropped the price. Like BTNX wasn't selling these strips for less than $1 to anyone. We came out the gate for programs at least with 65 to 45 cents per strip. And we took a huge portion of the market. Well, BTNX got really pissed off and had this big shot law firm send us a cease and desist letter claiming false advertising, tortious interference. What? Tortious interference. I love that I've been accused twice now by companies of tortious interference by BTNX and then Miraculix and their cease and desist letter as well, right? Like, what does that even mean? So I looked it up. Well, I know what it means. And like, it was at first, you get a letter like, oh, we're going to sue you if you don't, right? You get a little bit nervous. But as soon as I finished reading the letter, I kind of laughed. It was so ridiculous. I had scientific studies backing me up. I could prove every single thing because I wrote all the marketing and educational materials for DanceSafe and for these strips. Again, I worked another year with WHPM and Kara to produce these strips, and I knew what I was talking about. Unfortunately, however,
we're running out of time.
Oh, okay.
We hate to do it.
So I want to say first, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your contribution. I also want to really quickly mention that the drug cards, you had mentioned to me, you worked with a graphic artist to design those, which we keep in a book at all of our meetings so people can go through them.
Yep.
But I just want to say how much I really appreciate you giving us as much of your time and hard-won wisdom on this area. Do not be surprised if we come back to you. Also,
I love to talk, if you haven't realized.
We'll have you whenever you want to come.
You're with the right people. We always have an open invitation to come out to St. Louis. Just so you know, Mooncat, some of the other groups out here in the Midwest, their leadership was on Zoom. I want to thank all the Zoom participants. and let everybody know we will have this up on our YouTube channel. And I believe that Emanuel might put the audio on his podcast. If you would, please share your websites and your podcast.
Okay, yeah, podcast is drugpositive.org. And Grassroots Harm Reduction is the nonprofit I now work for. We have a lab here in Albuquerque where we make the reagents and we sell the WHPM strips. And we have t-shirts like this one. Like, I want to show you these. These, when I set up live with the heat press machine, these are like so popular. They have the text on the back.
Oh, the O card on there.
Yeah, so they're educational, right? So someone says, "Oh, you're promoting drug use," you can just turn around and say, "No, this is harm reduction." But they don't sell. They're not selling very well online. Maybe because the pictures aren't good, but they're really nice. They're really high quality. So please spread the word about Grassroots Harm Reduction. We have a very simple mission, and that is to sell the lowest cost drug checking supplies and turn over all of the proceeds to peer-based harm reduction organizations. So I'm the only employee, and after I get paid, 100% of the profits are redistributed to local independent harm reduction groups on the ground. And they're like almost half the price of DanceSafe or anywhere else that you can find them. And Matt and I make them, so they're high quality.
Thank you so much, man, for your time.
Yeah.
You really are a joy to have at any point. You're welcome here whenever. I know
Thank
Michael
you.
set you up.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you at the next one.
Bye, everyone.